single mother with 4 kids was turned away by every landlord in the city. Every single one. That same night, the wife of the last man who refused her was driving past a small park near downtown. Her headlights swept across a bench. She saw something. It wasn't a pile of old blankets. It wasn't a homeless man. It wasn't what she expected at all. It was the woman her husband had turned away that morning. And her 4 children, sleeping on a park bench in October. What she did next would fracture her marriage, save 5 lives, and expose a wound her husband had been hiding for over a decade. Denise Calloway was 34 years old, and she was nobody's idea of helpless. For 2 years, she'd held it all together. Alone. 4 kids, 1 paycheck, no safety net. She'd worked as an administrative assistant at Regional One Health in Memphis. Not glamorous work, but steady, reliable. The kind of job that kept the lights on and the cereal in the pantry, and the rent paid 3 days before it was due every single month. Her ex-husband Terrence left when Nyla was 3 months old. Didn't leave a note. Didn't leave money. Didn't leave an explanation. Just left. One Tuesday morning, his side of the closet was empty. His car was gone. His phone was disconnected by noon. Denise didn't fall apart. She couldn't afford to. She had a 2-year-old named Miles who needed speech therapy twice a week. A 4-year-old named Zara who'd just started pre-K and needed someone to braid her hair every morning at 6:15 because she refused to go to school without her braids. An 8-year-old named Jalen who'd started doing his own laundry without being asked because he'd seen his mother cry once at 11 p.m. over a pile of unwashed clothes and decided he would never let that happen again. And then there was Nyla, 2 years old. The one who still thought the world was good because her mother made sure of it every single day. Denise kept that family running like a machine built from duct tape and willpower. She meal prepped on Sundays. Bulk rice, frozen vegetables, canned tuna stretched across 5 days. She cut the kids' hair herself using YouTube tutorials and a $12 clipper from Walmart. She walked 40 minutes to work when the bus fare went up, because $2.75 each way times 5 days was $27.50 a month, and $27.50 was Nyla's diapers for 2 weeks. The apartment wasn't much. 2 bedrooms on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator hadn't worked since 2019. The hallway smelled like bleach and cooking oil. The bathroom faucet dripped in a rhythm Denise had memorized so well she couldn't sleep in silence anymore. But it was theirs. And for 2 years that was enough. Then the building sold. New ownership. New management. New plans for renovation and market rate pricing. The notice came on a Thursday. 30 days. All tenants. No exceptions. Denise read that letter standing in the kitchen while Jalen did homework at the table and Zara colored beside him, and Miles ate crackers on the floor, and Nyla slept in the portable crib wedged between the refrigerator and the wall. She read it twice, folded it, placed it in the drawer next to the utility bills, and started dinner. She didn't panic. Not then. Panic was a luxury for people who had someone else to catch them. For 4 weeks she searched every listing, every website, every bulletin board at the laundromat and the church and the community center. She called numbers from index cards taped to gas station windows. She filled out applications during her lunch break, writing the same information over and over. Name, age, employment, income, number of dependents. 4. That number followed her like a shadow with teeth. The day the lease expired, Denise loaded everything they owned into a rented storage unit the size of a parking space. 2 trash bags of clothes, a box of dishes, Jalen's school books, Zara's stuffed bear named Queenie, threadbare at the seams, 1 eye missing, held together by love, and a safety pin, Miles's favorite blanket, Nyla's diapers and formula, everything that remained of a life that used to have walls and a door that locked from the inside. Denise stood in the parking lot of that storage facility, holding Nyla on one hip, her phone in the other hand, scrolling through rental listings with the focus of a surgeon. The other 3 children stood behind her in a line. Jalen carried the backpack. He always carried the backpack. It held diapers, wipes, 2 juice boxes, a change of clothes for Nyla, and a granola bar he'd been saving for 2 days but wouldn't eat because he knew his mother hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. His shoulders were thin. His back was straight. He was 8 years old, and he carried that bag like a soldier carries a wounded friend. Without complaint, without hesitation. Because someone had to. Zara held Queenie against her chest with both arms. Miles held Zara's hand. And Nyla slept on Denise's shoulder cracker, crumbs still on her lips, her small fist gripping the collar of her mother's shirt like an anchor. They looked, all five of them, like a family portrait painted by someone who understood both beauty and breaking. Denise wore sneakers so worn the soles had thinned to fabric. She could feel every pebble, every crack, every piece of gravel through what was left of them. Her hair was pulled back with a rubber band she'd taken from a bundle of produce at the grocery store because the last real hair tie had snapped 2 weeks ago. Her eyes carried circles beneath them. Not one layer, 3. The kind that don't come from one bad night but from months of sleeping, with one ear open and one hand on the nearest child. She didn't look broken. That was the thing. She looked like a woman carrying something impossibly heavy and refusing to set it down. She carried the pride of someone who had nothing left to lose except the one thing she would never surrender: her children. The first landlord was polite about it, professional even. He sat behind a desk in a small office that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. He looked at Denise's application for exactly 45 seconds. She knew, because she counted. His eyes stopped on one line. Dependence. 4. He looked up, smiled. The kind of smile that has nothing behind it. Sorry, he said. We have a strict noise policy in this building. It's really more suited for single professionals and couples. You understand. Denise understood. She'd been understanding her whole life. Thank you for your time, she said. Picked up Nyla, took Miles's hand. She'd found the listing online. 2 bedrooms, affordable, close to a school with a good rating. She called ahead. The woman who answered sounded warm, friendly, said, "Come by any time, we'd love to meet you." Denise dressed the children in their cleanest clothes, braided Zara's hair with extra care, made Jalen tuck in his shirt. She wanted them to look like what they were, a family, not a problem. When she walked up to the building, the for rent sign was in the window. Big, red letters, impossible to miss. The landlord opened the door, looked at Denise, looked past Denise, counted. Her smile faded like a light dimming behind curtains. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "We actually just rented that unit out this morning. Just this morning. I forgot to take the sign down. You know how it is." She closed the door before Denise could respond. They walked back to the bus stop in silence. Jalen stared at the building as they passed it. The sign was still in the window, red letters, bright as a wound. "Mama," he said quietly. "Why is the sign still there?" Denise didn't answer. She squeezed his hand tighter and kept walking because if she opened her mouth, what came out wouldn't be words. It would be something raw and ancient and too heavy for an 8-year-old to carry. The third landlord didn't bother pretending. She was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on her nose and a clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. She looked at Denise's paperwork for less than 10 seconds. "Honey," she said, and the word dripped with something that wanted to pass as kindness but tasted like rust. 4 kids in a 2-bedroom, that's a lawsuit waiting to happen. I'm doing you a favor by saying no." Denise stared at her, nodded once, turned around. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She didn't beg. Because begging requires believing that the person in front of you sees you as human. And Denise had stopped believing that 3 apartments ago. The 4th time was the worst. Not because it was the cruelest, because it was the closest she'd come to hope. Gerald Whitmore, 52 years old, owned a small cluster of rental properties on the east side of the city. Nothing fancy, working-class housing. The kind of units where the appliances were 10 years old and the carpet had been replaced once in the last decade. Gerald had spoken to Denise on the phone for 1 minute. She'd told him everything, her income, her work history, her situation. She'd been transparent because she was tired of surprises. He'd said, "Come by tomorrow. I've got a 3-bedroom that just opened up. Sounds like it could work." Those words. Sounds like it could work. Denise had replayed them in her head all night. She hadn't slept much, but when she did, she dreamed of a door with a lock and walls that stayed still. The next morning, she dressed the children carefully. Made Jalen wear his good shoes, the ones she'd bought from Goodwill 2 months ago that were already getting tight. Brushed Miles's hair until it laid flat. Changed Nyla into the cleanest onesie she had left. They arrived at 10 a.m. Gerald opened the front door. He was a large man, broad shoulders, work boots, hands that had clearly built things and fixed things and carried things for decades. His face was open, not unfriendly. Then he looked past Denise. His eyes moved from Jalen to Zara to Miles to Nyla. 1, 2, 3, 4. Something shifted behind his face. Not cruelty, something quieter, something that looked almost like fear. "I didn't realize it was this many," he said. His voice was different now, tighter, smaller. "Mr. Whitmore," Denise said. "They're well behaved, they're quiet. Jalen helps with everything. I keep a clean home. I've never missed a rent payment in my life." Gerald rubbed the back of his neck, looked at the ground, looked at the porch railing, looked everywhere except at the 4 children standing in a perfect line behind their mother, waiting for another door to close. "I'm sorry," he said. "I just can't take the risk. 4 kids, that's a lot of wear and tear, a lot of liability. You understand." There it was again. You understand. As if understanding made it hurt less. Denise looked at him the way a person looks at the last exit on a highway before the road runs out. "Thank you for your time, sir," she said. She turned, took Jalen's hand, took Miles's hand. Zara clutched Queenie against her chest. Nyla shifted on Denise's hip, reaching one small hand toward Gerald's porch railing, grabbing at nothing. They walked away. Denise's back was straight, her chin was level, her eyes were dry. Gerald watched them go. 5 figures getting smaller against the sidewalk. The smallest one looking back over her mother's shoulder at a house that would never be hers. He closed the door slowly, and something in his chest tightened in a way he didn't want to name. That night, Denise sat on a bench in Overton Park and made a phone call she'd been avoiding for 3 days. The shelter on Poplar Avenue, full. 47 families on the waiting list. 47. She called her sister in Little Rock. No answer. Called again. Voicemail. Called a 3rd time. Her sister picked up voice, tired, apologetic. "I'm staying with a friend right now, Dee. I don't even have my own room. I'm so sorry. I wish I could." Denise said it's okay. She always said it's okay, even when nothing was. She checked her wallet. $83. A motel room in Memphis cost at least $79 a night for a single. For 5 people with a cot, the cheapest she'd found was $119. One night would leave her with nothing. And nothing was worse than not enough, because not enough still had a direction. The October air settled around them like a cold hand pressing down on bare skin. Temperature dropping, 51 degrees and falling. The park was quiet. Streetlights hummed above the walking path, casting pale circles of yellow light on empty benches. Denise chose the bench closest to the streetlight. Visibility. Safety. The logic of a mother who'd learned to think like a soldier. She took off her jacket first, wrapped it around Nyla, who was already asleep in the stroller, mouth open, small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that Denise could hear even over the wind. Then, she took the extra sweatshirt from the backpack and draped it over Miles, who curled into a ball on the bench without being told. He'd done this before. Not here, but at bus stations, at hospital waiting rooms. On the floor of the shelter when all the cots were taken, Zara lay down next and pressed Queenie against her face, breathing in the smell of something familiar when everything else was foreign. Denise tucked the last clean blanket around her, a thin fleece with cartoon elephants that was too small now but still served its purpose. Jalen sat on the edge of the bench, upright, watching. "You can lie down, baby," Denise said softly. "I'm not tired," Jalen said. And Denise knew it was a lie. But she also knew why he told it. Because someone had to keep watch. And at 8 years old, Jalen had decided that someone was him. She sat beside him, put her arm around his narrow shoulders. And for a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The crickets filled the silence. A car passed on the road beyond the trees, headlights sweeping briefly through the darkness before vanishing. Nyla coughed in her sleep, a wet rattling sound that made Denise's stomach clench. She reached over, adjusted the jacket, pressed the back of her hand against Nyla's forehead. Warm, not hot, not yet, Miles murmured something in his dream. "Mama." The word floated up from his sleep like smoke from a candle, shapeless and already dissolving. Denise didn't cry. She hadn't cried in weeks. Tears required a kind of surrender she couldn't afford, a pause in the machinery of survival that might cause the whole thing to seize and stop. Instead, she planned Tomorrow morning she'd call the shelter again. First thing. 6 a.m. Before the line got long, she'd try 3 more listings she'd circled on her phone. She'd walk to the library and use the computer to search for emergency housing programs. She'd ask the church on Lamar Avenue if they had any leads. Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. The word repeated in her mind like a heartbeat, not a hope, a mechanism. The thing that kept her legs moving and her hands steady and her voice calm when every nerve in her body was screaming. She leaned back against the bench. The wood was cold through her thin shirt. Above her, the streetlight buzzed a faint electrical hum that sounded almost like breathing. She counted her children's breaths in the darkness. 1, 2, 3, 4. All still breathing. All still here. That was enough. For tonight, that was enough. Lorraine Whitmore was 49 years old, a retired nurse. Not retired by choice. Retired because her lower back had given out after 22 years of lifting patients and standing through 1-2-hour shifts and bending over hospital beds in ways the human spine was never designed to endure. She and Gerald had been married for 26 years, a solid marriage, quiet, the kind built on routine and reliability rather than passion. Gerald fixed things. Lorraine fed people. They went to church on Sundays. They paid their bills on time. They didn't fight often, and when they did, it was about small things. The thermostat, the yard, whether to repaint the kitchen this year or next. They didn't have children. Not because they didn't want them, because the universe had decided 3 separate times that they couldn't keep them. The first miscarriage happened when Lorraine was 31. Early. 8 weeks. The doctor said it was common. Said try again. Said these things happen. Lorraine nodded. Went home. Tried again. The second one came at 14 weeks. Far enough along that she'd already picked a name. Far enough along that she'd told her mother. Far enough along that the loss left a shape in her body, a hollow that food and sleep and time couldn't fill. The third one nearly killed her. 19 weeks. An emergency room at 2 a.m. Gerald sitting in the parking lot in his truck for 6 hours because he couldn't walk through those doors. Couldn't watch her lose another one. Couldn't stand in that room and pretend to be strong when everything inside him had already shattered. After that, they stopped trying, stopped talking about it, stopped looking at the second bedroom and the third bedroom in their house. Gerald turned one into a storage room for his fishing gear. Tackle boxes and rods and reels lined up against the wall where a crib might have been. Lorraine never went in that room, not once in 15 years. That October evening, Lorraine drove home from Wednesday night prayer service at Greater Mount Zion. The sermon had been about mercy, about seeing the invisible, about the people God places in your path not by accident but by design. She took the shortcut through Overton Park, the same route she always took. Windows up, radio on low, gospel station. The night was cold and clear and ordinary. Her headlights swept across the walking path, across the empty playground, across the row of benches near the old magnolia tree, and then she saw something, a shape on the bench. No, not one shape, several. Small shapes, bundled close together, too small to be adults, too still to be playing. Lorraine slowed the car. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She pulled over, cut the engine, sat there for a moment with the headlights still on, casting 2 long beams of white light across the grass. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear, from something deeper. Something she couldn't name yet. She opened the door, stepped out. The cold hit her immediately, slicing through her coat, finding the gap between her collar and her neck. She walked toward the bench, slowly, the way you approach something fragile, something that might break or bolt if you move too fast. 10 feet away, she saw them clearly. 4 children, sleeping on a park bench in October. The smallest one wrapped in a jacket too large for her body. 2 middle ones curled together, a stuffed animal pressed between them. The oldest one sitting upright at the far end, eyes closed but body rigid, pretending to sleep. And in the center, a woman, sitting perfectly still, hands resting on 2 of the children, back straight against the wooden slats, eyes open, watching. Lorraine stopped walking. The woman's eyes found hers across the darkness. No words. No sound except the crickets and the distant hum of traffic and the faint wheeze of the smallest child breathing through a stuffy nose. 2 women, looking at each other in the half-light of a street lamp. One had a house with 3 bedrooms and 2 of them empty. One had 4 children and no roof over their heads. One had lost every child she'd ever carried. One was holding on to hers with everything she had left. Lorraine felt something crack open inside her chest. Not break. Crack open, the way a seed cracks open when it finally decides to grow. She didn't call the police, didn't reach for her phone to dial 211 or the shelter hotline or anyone else who might take this problem off her hands and file it away in a system already drowning in need. Instead, she stepped closer. Close enough to see the woman's face clearly. Close enough to see the exhaustion carved into every line. Close enough to see the fierce, quiet dignity that held her spine straight, even now, even here, even on a park bench, at 9:47 on a Wednesday night, with 4 sleeping children and nowhere in the world to go. "Come with me," Lorraine said. Her voice was steady, certain. The voice of a woman who had just made a decision so large it hadn't fully landed in her brain yet, but had already taken root in her bones. "All of you. Right now." Denise stared at her. The kind of stare that measures danger and kindness and deception all at once, because when you've been turned away enough times you stop being able to tell the difference. "I don't know you," Denise said quietly. "I know," Lorraine replied. "But your babies are cold. And I have room." 6 words. I have room. The simplest sentence in the English language, and the heaviest thing Lorraine Whitmore had said in 15 years. Denise looked at her children. Looked at this stranger in a church coat with kind eyes and steady hands, looked at the car idling by the curb with its headlights still on, still casting light across the dark. She made her decision the way mothers make all their decisions, not for herself, for them. 15 minutes later, Lorraine pulled into the driveway of the house on Prescott Street. Gerald's truck was gone. Poker night at his brother's place. He wouldn't be back until late. She unlocked the front door and held it open. The warm air hit them first. Actual heat. Radiator heat. The kind of warmth that wraps around your body and loosens muscles you didn't know you'd been clenching for days. Nyla woke up on Denise's shoulder. Blinked. Looked around at the living room with wide eyes. Touched the doorframe with one small hand. "House," she said. Her voice was tiny and wondering. "Mama House." Denise's jaw tightened. She nodded. "Just for tonight, baby." Miles walked in next. He approached the couch the way a stray animal approaches food left on a porch, slowly, ready to bolt. He touched the cushion with one finger, then sat down so gently it barely made a sound. He pulled his knees up to his chest and sat perfectly still, as if any sudden movement might cause all of this to disappear. Zara followed, clutching Queenie with both arms. She looked up at Lorraine. "Can Queenie sleep on the bed?" Lorraine felt her throat close. She nodded. "Queenie can sleep wherever she wants, sweetheart." Jalen was the last one through the door. He stepped inside but didn't go far. He stood 3 feet from the entrance, back against the walleye, scanning the room the way his mother scanned the park, watching exits, measuring distance, calculating how quickly he could get his siblings out if he needed to. He was 8 years old. And he stood at that door like a sentry who'd been on watch so long he'd forgotten how to stand down. Lorraine saw him. Saw all of it. The tension in his small shoulders, the way his eyes moved, the way he kept his shoes on while everyone else had already taken theirs off. She didn't say anything to him. Not yet. She knew better. Some children you have to earn. She went to the kitchen, boiled water, cracked 4 eggs into a pot, pulled noodles from the pantry. She made egg noodles at 11 o'clock at night for 4 children she'd met 20 minutes ago, and her hands didn't shake once. The children ate in silence. Not the comfortable silence of a family dinner, the focused, urgent silence of hunger being answered, spoons scraping bowls, small mouths chewing, eyes down. Denise sat across from them. She didn't eat. She watched them eat. The way she'd been watching them do everything for months. Sleep, walk, breathe, making sure each one was still alive, still whole, still here. Lorraine set a bowl in front of her. Denise shook her head. "I'm fine. They needed it more." Lorraine sat down beside her. Looked at her. Not with pity. with recognition, with the steady gaze of a woman who understood sacrifice, not because she'd read about it, but because she'd lived her own version of it. "When's the last time you ate?" Lorraine asked. Denise paused. "They ate this morning," she said. Lorraine's voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't ask about them. I asked about you." The silence that followed was long enough to hold everything Denise had been carrying. Every skipped meal, every lie she'd told herself about not being hungry. Every time she'd split a granola bar 4 ways and called the wrapper her dinner. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The answer was sitting right there in the bones of her wrists and the hollows of her cheeks and the way her body curved forward over that table like a tree that had been bending in the wind for so long it had forgotten what straight felt like. Lorraine pushed the bowl closer. "Eat," she said. "Just eat." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Denise Calloway picked up a spoon and fed herself. Gerald Whitmore came home at 6:47 the next morning. He'd stayed late at his brother's after poker, slept on the couch, drove home with coffee from the gas station and the morning news on low. He walked through the front door, expecting silence. Expecting the house the way it always was. Clean, quiet, empty. Instead, he heard something he hadn't heard inside these walls in 26 years of living here. Children's voices. He stepped into the kitchen and froze. 4 children sat at his dining table. The smallest one was in Lorraine's lap eating Cheerios with her fingers and dropping half of them on the floor. A boy about 4 was kneeling on a chair, stirring a bowl of cereal with intense concentration. A girl maybe 6 was braiding the hair of a stuffed bear propped up against the salt shaker. And an older boy, maybe 8, was standing at the counter washing bowls in the sink. Nobody had asked him to wash those bowls. Gerald could see that immediately. The boy was doing it because he'd decided it needed doing. Then Gerald's eyes found the woman standing near the stove. She was holding a spatula, making eggs, in his kitchen, using his stove, wearing the same clothes she'd worn yesterday when she'd stood on his porch with 4 children and asked for a place to live. The woman, he'd turned away. His stomach dropped, not with anger, with something colder, recognition. "Lorraine," Gerald said. His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man trying very hard to stay calm. "What is this?" Lorraine was sitting at the table with the smallest girl in her lap. She looked up at him. Her face was calm too. But underneath the calm, there was something else. Something Gerald hadn't seen in years. Resolve. "Gerald," she said evenly, "this is Denise. And these are her children. They're staying with us." Gerald set his coffee on the counter. The styrofoam cup made a small sound against the formica. He looked at Denise. Denise looked back. Neither flinched. "Can I talk to you?" Gerald said to Lorraine. Not a question. He walked to the back bedroom. Lorraine set Nyla down carefully on the chair, making sure she was stable, and followed him. The door closed. "What did you do?" Gerald's voice was low, tight, the voice of a man whose walls had been breached while he wasn't home. "You brought strangers into our house, Lorraine, strangers, with 4 kids. This is insane." "Do you understand how insane this is? They were sleeping in the park," Lorraine said. "In the park, in October, on a bench. The baby was coughing." "That's not our problem," Gerald said. And even as the words left his mouth, something inside him flinched. Lorraine looked at him. Really looked at him. The way she hadn't looked at him in years. Not with anger, with clarity. "You made it our problem," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It lowered, which was worse. "You looked at that woman yesterday. You looked at her and her 4 children standing on your porch, and you sent them away. You told her you couldn't take the risk." Gerald opened his mouth to speak. "I found them on a bench last night, Gerald. A park bench, in the cold. The 2-year-old was wrapped in a jacket so big it covered her whole body. The 8-year-old was sitting up, pretending to sleep, guarding his mother and his sisters and his brother in the dark. He's 8 years old, and he was standing guard. So yes, Gerald, this is our problem. You made it our problem when you closed that door." Gerald was quiet. The kind of quiet that fills a room the way water fills a jar. Slowly, completely. He wasn't a cruel man. He'd never been cruel. He was careful, cautious, defended. His father, Raymond Whitmore, had rented out 4 houses on the east side for 30 years. Gerald grew up watching tenants skip payments, punch holes in drywall, disappear in the middle of the night with 3 months' rent owed and a busted water heater left behind. His father had taught him one thing above all else: protect what's yours. Don't let anyone take advantage. Don't get involved with people's problems. Help them once, and they'll expect it forever. Gerald had carried that lesson like a coat of armor for his entire adult life. It had served him well. His properties were maintained, his books were balanced, his risk was managed. But standing in that bedroom listening to his wife describe an 8-year-old boy standing guard over his family on a park bench, Gerald felt the armor crack. Just slightly. Just enough to let in a cold draft of something he didn't want to feel. He didn't say yes. He said a few days. That's it. A few days. Then they figure something out. Lorraine nodded. She knew a few days was a door cracked open. And cracked was enough. Gerald walked back to the kitchen. The older boy, Jalen, had finished the dishes. Every bowl, every spoon, every cup from the morning was clean and stacked on the drying rack. The counter had been wiped down. The cereal box was put away. Gerald stared at the clean kitchen. Then at the boy, 8 years old, thin arms, shirt tucked in, standing straight. Jalen looked at him with steady eyes. Not afraid, not defiant, just steady. The kind of steady that comes from being the oldest in a family that can't afford softness. Something moved inside Gerald's chest. He pushed it down, walked past the boy, grabbed his coffee, went to the garage. But at the garage door he stopped, turned around. Jalen was already helping Miles into his chair, lifting him up with both arms, gentle as anything, setting him down, pushing the bowl of cereal closer. Then straightening his brother's shirt collar. Then picking a Cheerio off the floor before anyone could step on it. Gerald watched, said nothing, closed the garage door behind him. But he didn't leave for work, not for another 20 minutes. He just sat in his truck, engine off, hands on the wheel, staring at the dashboard. His father's voice echoed in his head. Don't get involved. It never ends well. But another voice, quieter and older and buried deeper, whispered something else. Something that sounded a lot like his mother, the woman who died when Gerald was 12. The woman who'd never turned away a single person who knocked on her door, no matter how little they had to share. That voice said nothing specific. It just hummed, the way a mother hums when a child can't sleep. Gerald sat in the truck, and the hum wouldn't stop. The first morning Gerald came downstairs and the kitchen was already clean. Not just clean, spotless. The counters had been wiped with something that smelled like vinegar and lemon. The floor had been swept. The trash bag by the back door had been replaced with a fresh one tied and set outside. He looked around. It was 6:15 a.m. No one else was up yet except Denise, who was folding blankets in the living room, folding them with crisp, deliberate edges. The kind of edges you make when you know the space doesn't belong to you and you want to leave it better than you found it. She saw him, nodded. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Gerald nodded back, said nothing, poured his coffee, went to the garage. The second morning, same thing. Kitchen spotless, blankets folded. Denise was up before the sun, moving through the house like a guest who was determined to be invisible. Gerald didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything at all. He noticed. That was the beginning. On the third day, Jalen followed Gerald to the driveway when he was loading tools into his truck for a repair job at one of his rental units. The boy stood a few feet back, hands at his sides, watching. "You need help carrying anything, sir?" Gerald looked at him, surprised. Not many people offered Gerald anything. Tenants complained. Plumbers overcharged. His brother borrowed tools and forgot to return them. But this 8-year-old boy, this child who'd been sleeping on a park bench 4 nights ago, was standing on his driveway at 7 a.m., asking if he needed help. Gerald paused, then nodded. "You can carry the toolbox." Jalen picked it up with both hands. It was heavy for him. Gerald could see the strain in his thin arms, but the boy didn't complain, didn't struggle, walked it to the truck bed and set it down carefully, making sure nothing rattled. "Thank you," Gerald said. The words came out rough, underused. "Yes, sir," Jalen said, and walked back inside. On the 4th day, Miles appeared at the breakfast table with something in his fist. He'd been playing in the backyard, the small patch of grass behind the house that Lorraine kept watered but Gerald rarely visited. Miles walked up to Lorraine, who was pouring orange juice at the counter. He held up his hand. In it was a single wildflower, small, yellow, slightly bent from being gripped too tightly. "For the pretty lady," he said. Lorraine took the flower. She looked at it for a long moment. A dandelion, really, a weed by most definitions. But Miles had picked it with intention and carried it inside with purpose and presented it with the solemnity of a man offering a diamond. Lorraine turned away from the table, faced the window, pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Gerald saw it from the hallway. He saw his wife's shoulders tremble, saw her close her eyes, saw her hold a dandelion like it was the most precious thing she'd ever received. He kept walking, pretended he hadn't seen. But he had, and the image followed him all day. The dandelion in Lorraine's hand, the boy who'd picked it, the look on his wife's face like something frozen had finally begun to thaw. On the 5th day, Nyla said it. She was sitting on the floor in the living room playing with measuring cups Lorraine had given her from the kitchen. She stacked them, knocked them down, stacked them again, knocked them down. The game had no rules and no end, and she was delighted by it. Lorraine was sitting on the couch nearby, watching her the way she used to watch television before television stopped holding her interest, with complete absorption, with nowhere else she'd rather be. Nyla looked up, held out a measuring cup. "Lolo," she said. "Lolo, look." Lorraine blinked. "That's me?" she asked softly. "I'm Lolo," Nyla grinned. A gap-toothed, open-mouthed 2-year-old grin that could crack concrete. "Lolo," she repeated and went back to her cups. Lorraine didn't correct her. Didn't say, "My name is Lorraine." Didn't say, "Mrs. Whitmore." Didn't redirect or clarify or establish appropriate boundaries the way a reasonable adult hosting temporary guests probably should. She just sat there, on her own couch, in her own house, being called a name she'd never had by a child who wasn't hers. And something settled into her chest that had been unsettled for 15 years. She didn't tell Gerald about it. Not that night. Not the next day. She carried the word privately, like a letter she wasn't ready to share. On the 6th day, Gerald came home early and found Denise sitting on the back porch using a cracked phone connected to his Wi-Fi. She was scrolling through job listings. He could see the screen from the doorway. Indeed, Craigslist, Memphis City Jobs Portal. She'd bookmarked 11 listings and had 3 applications open in separate tabs. She looked up when she heard him. Immediately started to stand. "I can go inside if you need the porch," she said. Gerald waved his hand. "Sit down. It's fine." He went inside. Stood at the kitchen window. Watched her through the glass. Watched her scroll and type and scroll and type with the focus of someone who treated job hunting the way soldiers treated missions. Systematic. Relentless. No pauses for self-pity. She hadn't asked him for money. Hadn't asked Lorraine for anything beyond the basics. She folded her blankets every morning. Washed her dishes immediately after use. Kept her children quiet during the evening hours. Applied for work every single day. She lived in his house the way a person lives in a borrowed coat. Grateful. Careful. Always ready to hand it back. On the 7th morning, Gerald came downstairs and the kitchen was clean. The blankets were folded. Denise was already dressed, helping Jalen with his jacket, getting ready to walk to the library to use the computers for more applications. Gerald looked at the kitchen, looked at the folded blankets, looked at the woman who'd been sleeping on a park bench a week ago and now moved through his house with more care and dignity than most people showed in homes they owned. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "There's no rush," he said. His voice was quiet, almost reluctant, like the words had been pulled from somewhere deep and had come out slightly against his will. "Stay as long as you need to get things figured out." Denise looked at him, searched his face for the catch, for the condition, for the asterisk, found nothing but a man standing in his own kitchen, looking slightly uncomfortable with his own kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," she said. Gerald nodded, poured his coffee, went to the garage, but for the first time in a week he didn't sit in his truck. He drove straight to work, and on the way he turned the radio off, drove in silence. Let the quiet fill the cab. His father's voice was still there, faint, familiar. "Protect what's yours. Don't get involved." But it was getting harder to hear. Drowned out by the sound of a 2-year-old saying, "Lolo." by the sight of a dandelion in his wife's trembling hand, by an 8-year-old boy carrying a toolbox across a driveway without being asked. Gerald drove, and for the first time in a very long time he didn't know what he believed anymore. And that not knowing felt less like weakness than it did like the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. It happened on a Tuesday night. Gerald was out late, fixing a busted pipe at one of his rental units across town. Lorraine and Denise sat at the kitchen table after the children had gone to sleep, 2 mugs of tea between them. The house was quiet in the way only a house full of sleeping children can be. Not silent, breathing. Lorraine held her mug with both hands, stared into it for a long time. Then she started talking. "We tried for 12 years, she said. Her voice was low. Not sad exactly, more like tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying a story you've told yourself 1,000 times, but never said out loud to someone who might actually hear it. The first time I was 31. Early. 8 weeks. The doctor said it happens. Said try again. Said it like he was talking about a recipe that didn't rise, so we tried again." Lorraine paused, took a breath. "The second time was worse. 14 weeks. I'd already picked a name, already told my mother, already bought a onesie from the clearance rack at Target. Yellow, gender neutral, I still have it. It's in a box in the closet behind my winter coats. I haven't opened that box in 15 years, but I know exactly where it is." Denise didn't speak. She didn't need to. She held her mug and she listened the way only a mother can listen to another woman's grief, without trying to fix it, without comparing it, just holding space. "The third time nearly killed me," Lorraine said. 19 weeks. I woke up at 2 in the morning in a puddle of blood. Gerald drove me to the hospital. He drove 90 miles an hour on empty streets and didn't say a single word the whole way. She stopped, set her mug down, pressed her fingers flat against the table like she needed something solid to hold on to. "He didn't come inside," Lorraine said quietly. "He parked the truck in the hospital lot and he sat there. For 6 hours. While I was in the emergency room losing our baby for the 3rd time, my husband sat in a parking lot because he couldn't walk through those doors." Denise's hands tightened around her mug. "I was so angry," Lorraine continued. "For months after I was furious. I thought he was weak. I thought he didn't care enough. I thought if he really loved me, if he really loved our baby, he would have been in that room holding my hand instead of sitting in a truck staring at a dashboard." Her voice cracked. Just slightly, like a window pane with a hairline fracture that's been holding for years. I asked him once, months later, why he didn't come in, why he sat out there while I went through it alone, and he said something I've never forgotten. Lorraine looked up at Denise. Her eyes were wet but steady. He said, "I can't watch you lose another one. I can't. I'm not strong enough." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's when I understood," Lorraine said. "Gerald isn't cold. He isn't cruel. He's broken. He broke the night we lost our 3rd baby, and he never put himself back together. He just built walls. Around his heart, around this house, around those empty rooms. He turned one into a fishing storage room because he couldn't stand looking at 4 bare walls that were supposed to hold a crib." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her palm. No tissue, no ceremony. Just a quick swipe the way a woman wipes tears when she's had years of practice. "That's why he said no to you," Lorraine said. "It wasn't about the noise. It wasn't about the risk. It wasn't about property damage or liability or any of the things he told himself. It was about the children. 4 of them, walking into his life, needing things, being small and vulnerable and real. And Gerald cannot handle that, because every child he sees reminds him of the 3 we never got to hold." Denise sat very still. Her face had changed. The guardedness she'd worn like armor since the day she arrived had softened into something else. Not pity, understanding. The kind that comes when you realize the person who hurt you was already hurting long before you met them. "He's not a bad man," Denise said softly. "No," Lorraine said. "He's a scared one. And scared men build the tallest walls." If this story is touching your heart, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Now, let's continue. Gerald came home late that Thursday, past 10. The house was dark, except for the small lamp Lorraine always left on in the hallway, the one with the yellow shade that made everything it touched look warm. He set his keys on the counter, hung his jacket on the hook by the door, walked toward the living room to turn off the lamp, and then he stopped. Lorraine was asleep on the couch. That wasn't unusual. She fell asleep there, sometimes watching television or reading the church bulletin. But she wasn't alone. Nyla was curled in her lap, the 2-year-old's small body pressed against Lorraine's chest, one tiny fist gripping the fabric of Lorraine's nightgown. Her face was tucked into the space between Lorraine's neck and shoulder, the place where a child's head fits perfectly. The place designed by biology for exactly this purpose. Lorraine's arms were wrapped around Nyla, one hand on the child's back, the other resting on her own stomach. Low, below the navel, the position of instinct, the position of a body that remembers what it's like to carry something precious in that space, even when that space has been empty for 15 years. Gerald stood in the doorway. Neither of them knew he was there. Neither of them stirred. The lamp cast gold across their faces. Nyla's lips were parted slightly in sleep. Lorraine's breathing was deep and even. Two people who'd found each other in the dark and settled into a peace that neither of them had known they were missing. Gerald looked at his wife. Really looked, the way he hadn't looked at her in years, and he saw something he'd been too afraid to see. She was holding the child she'd always wanted, and the child was holding her back. He turned away, walked down the hallway to the room where the other children slept, pushed the door open slowly. The hinges creaked. A slice of hallway light fell across the floor. Miles and Zara were tangled together on the air mattress, Queenie wedged between them like a chaperone. Jalen was on the cot by the window. He was sitting up, his eyes were open. Alert. Fixed on the door. The moment Gerald appeared, Jalen's body went rigid. His hands gripped the edge of the blanket. His back straightened, his chin lifted. "Are we leaving?" he asked. 4 words, spoken by an 8-year-old boy in the dark. No fear in his voice. No pleading, just a question. Flat, practiced. The question of a child who had asked it so many times in so many places that it had become as routine as brushing his teeth. Are we leaving? Not will you let us stay. Not please don't make us go. Just are we leaving? Present tense. Already assuming the answer, Gerald felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, crack. The way ice cracks on a river in early spring. Not all at once, just enough to let the water underneath start moving again. He walked to the edge of Jalen's cot, sat down. The frame sagged slightly under his weight. The boy watched him the way a deer watches a truck on a country road. Still, ready. No, Gerald said. The word hung in the dark between them. No, he said again. Quieter this time. Slower. You're not leaving. Jalen stared at him. Searching for the lie. Searching for the catch. Searching for the moment when this would turn into another door closing, and another sidewalk stretching out in front of them, and another night on another bench. He didn't find it, because it wasn't there. Jalen lay back down slowly, pulled the blanket up to his chin. His body softened. Not all the way, not completely, but enough. Enough that his shoulders dropped half an inch, enough that his grip on the blanket loosened from a fist to an open hand. Enough that for the first time in months he closed his eyes without calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Gerald sat there for a while, in the dark, listening to 3 children breathe, watching the rise and fall of small chests under borrowed blankets. Then he stood, walked back to the living room, took the throw blanket from the armchair and draped it over Lorraine and Nyla. Carefully, the way you cover something fragile, something you've decided to protect. He went to the kitchen, sat at the table, the same table where Lorraine had told Denise about the miscarriages 2 nights earlier, the same table where Miles had placed a dandelion for the pretty lady, the same table where 4 children had eaten cereal their first morning while Gerald stood frozen in the doorway. He put his elbows on the table, put his face in his hands, and for the first time in 12 years, Gerald Whitmore cried. Not loudly, not the way grief sounds in movies, the way it sounds in real life. In kitchens, at midnight, when no one else is awake, short, ragged breaths that a man tries to swallow before they become sound. Shoulders shaking, jaw clenched, tears leaking through fingers pressed hard against eye sockets. He didn't cry for Denise. He didn't cry for her children. He didn't cry because he'd been wrong, or because Lorraine had been right, or because the world was unjust and he was finally seeing it. He cried for 3 babies who never took a breath. He cried for a yellow onesie in a box behind winter coats. He cried for a parking lot at 2 a.m. where he'd sat alone because he wasn't strong enough to watch his wife lose what they'd both wanted more than anything in the world. He cried for a room he'd filled with fishing rods and tackle boxes because empty walls were louder than any sound he could bear. He cried because a 2-year-old girl had fallen asleep in his wife's arms, and his wife had held her the way she would have held their own daughter, with her hand on her stomach, with her whole body curved around something small and warm and alive. Gerald sat at that table until his breathing steadied, until the tears dried on his hands, until the kitchen clock read 1:2:4:7 a.m., and the only sound in the house was the radiator clicking and the wind pressing against the windows and the distant, gentle rhythm of sleeping children. He stood up, washed his face at the kitchen sink, dried it with a dish towel. Then he walked to the garage, opened the door to the storage room, the room that used to be a bedroom, the room that was supposed to be a nursery. He looked at the fishing rods leaning against the wall, the tackle boxes stacked on shelves, the old folding chair, the cooler. 15 years of things he'd put in this room to fill the space where something else was supposed to be. He picked up a tackle box, carried it to the garage, came back, picked up another one, carried it out. He didn't finish that night. It was late. He was tired. His eyes were still swollen. But he started. The next Saturday, Gerald drove to the hardware store, came back with 2 gallons of paint, lavender. He'd asked the woman at the counter what color girls liked. She said it depends on the girl. He said she's 6 and she carries a stuffed bear everywhere. The woman smiled. Lavender, she said. Trust me. He started painting that afternoon, moved the last of the fishing gear out by noon, taped the edges, rolled the walls. The room smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings, 2 things that had been absent from this house for longer than Gerald cared to count. Lorraine stood in the doorway, watched him, said nothing for a long time. You don't have to do this, she said finally. Gerald dipped the roller, pressed it against the wall, drew a long even stroke from ceiling to floor. I know, he said. That's why I'm doing it. Lorraine pressed her lips together, nodded once, walked away before he could see her face. The following week, Gerald built bunk beds, not from a kit, from lumber he cut in the garage, 2x4s and plywood, and a sander he hadn't used since the house was new. Jalen watched from the doorway, fascinated by the process, too polite to ask if he could help. Gerald looked up, handed him the sander. Sand that edge. Nice and smooth. Little kids are going to sleep on this. Can't have splinters. Yes, sir, Jalen said. And he sanded that edge like his life depended on it. Meanwhile, Denise had been accepted into a workforce development program through the city. Phlebotomy certification, 6 weeks of training, clinical hours at a lab downtown, stable work, good benefits. A real path forward. She left every morning at 7:15. Lorraine had the children dressed and fed by 7:00. It was a system built on trust and rhythm, 2 women running a household the way 2 gears run a clock. Different speeds, same direction. Jalen started at his new school on a Monday. Denise walked him to the bus stop. His shirt was ironed. His shoes were the ones Gerald had bought him from the Payless on Summer Avenue without telling anyone. The teacher asked him the standard first-day question. Where do you live, Jalen? He paused. Looked down at his desk. Looked back up. With Mr. Gerald and Miss Lolo, he said. Not at a shelter. Not on a bench. Not nowhere. Not I don't know. With Mr. Gerald and Miss Lolo. For the first time in 7 months, Jalen Calloway had an answer to that question. And the answer had a name. That Thursday, Denise found Gerald in the kitchen after dinner. She held out a credit card. His credit card. The one Lorraine had used that first night to buy emergency supplies for the children at the 2 4-hour Walgreens. Diapers. Cough medicine. Toddler formula. Socks. She placed it on the table between them the way you return something borrowed. With care. With weight. I wanted to give this back, she said. I know Lorraine used it that first night. I've kept track of everything. I'll pay you back as soon as I start working. Gerald looked at the card, looked at her, pushed the card back across the table. "Keep it," he said. "Consider it a rent deposit, for when you're ready for your own place." Denise opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Mr. Whitmore, I can't. It's not charity," Gerald said. His voice was gruff, the voice of a man who still wasn't comfortable with his own kindness. "It's practical. You're gonna need first and last month's rent. Start saving. But don't rush. Take your time. Get stable first." Denise stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. Gerald nodded back, picked up his coffee, went to the garage. That Sunday, Zara drew a picture. She'd been drawing all afternoon, lying on her stomach on the living room floor with a box of crayons Lorraine had bought her. She drew with the intensity of a surgeon, her small tongue poking out the side of her mouth, her eyes narrowed in concentration. When she finished, she held it up for everyone to see. It was a house, brown walls, a red door, green grass, a yellow sun, standard 6-year-old architecture. But in front of the house stood 7 people, not 5, 7. A tall woman with brown skin and 4 small figures beside her. That was Denise and her children, and next to them 2 more figures, a large man with broad shoulders, and a woman with a kind face holding the hand of the smallest figure in the group. Zara had drawn all of them together, one line, one house, one family. Gerald picked up the drawing, held it in both hands, studied it the way he'd studied blueprints and lease agreements and property tax documents for 30 years. But he'd never looked at any of those things the way he looked at this drawing. He looked at it like it was the most important document he'd ever held, like it answered a question he'd been too afraid to ask. He looked at it for a very long time, then he set it on the refrigerator, held it in place with a magnet shaped like a fish, and walked away without saying a word. But the drawing stayed. And every morning when Gerald poured his coffee, he stood in front of that refrigerator, and he looked at a picture of 7 people standing in front of a house with a red door. And something in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 15 years, continued to thaw, slowly, steadily. The way spring comes to places that have forgotten what warmth feels like. Denise graduated from the phlebotomy program on a Friday in March. She wore a white coat they gave her at the ceremony. It was the first new piece of clothing she'd put on in over a year that wasn't from a donation bin or a clearance rack. Jalen sat in the front row. He didn't clap when they called her name. He stood up, stood straight, put his hands at his sides, and watched his mother walk across that stage the way a soldier watches a flag being raised, with stillness, with pride so deep it doesn't need noise. 2 weeks later, she started at the hospital. Phlebotomy department, full benefits, regular hours, a schedule that let her drop Jalen and Zara at school in the morning and pick up Miles and Nyla from Lorraine's by 5:30. Lorraine's? Not a daycare center, not a neighbor doing a favor. Lorraine Whitmore's kitchen table where Nyla ate her lunch every day, in a high chair Gerald had found at a yard sale and sanded smooth himself. The apartment came next. Gerald had a unit open on the 2nd floor of his building on Prescott Street. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, laminate floors, a kitchen window that faced east and let in morning light. Nothing fancy. Builder-grade countertops, basic fixtures, carpet that had been replaced twice in the last decade. He offered it to Denise at a rate $200 below market. "Not charity," he said when she tried to argue. "You kept my house cleaner than it's been in 20 years. You're the best tenant I've never had. I'm being practical." Denise didn't argue further. She'd learned something about Gerald Whitmore over the past 11 months. When he decided something, the decision was already made before the sentence ended. Arguing with him was like arguing with weather. They moved in on a Saturday. Gerald carried boxes. Lorraine organized the kitchen. Jalen took charge of the bedroom he'd share with Miles, arranging things with the precision of someone who'd spent most of his life without a room to arrange. Zara placed Queenie on the windowsill of the living room, overlooking the street, like a sentry keeping watch. Nyla ran from room to room, opening and closing doors. The sound of doors fascinated her. Doors that opened and stayed open. Doors that closed and could be opened again. The concept of a door that belonged to her was still new enough to be thrilling. Then, Jalen did something that stopped everyone. He walked to the wall of the bedroom, pressed his palm flat against it, held it there. felt the paint, the plaster, the solidness underneath. He turned to his mother. "This is ours?" he asked. His voice was careful. "Testing." "Like ours," Denise nodded, her lips pressed together. She couldn't speak. Tears ran down her face, and she didn't wipe them because her hands were shaking, and if she moved them, she might collapse. Jalen looked at the wall again, then at the closet, then at the floor. "I'm gonna unpack real slow," he said quietly. "So it feels longer." A child who'd learned to never get comfortable was teaching himself to stay. Gerald changed his rental policies that spring. Quietly. No announcement, no press release, no public declaration. He just stopped saying no to families with children. He converted 2 of his units into what Lorraine called family-ready apartments. Wider doorways where strollers could pass through. Cabinet locks in the kitchen. Electrical outlet covers. A small fenced area in the back lot where children could play without wandering into the parking area. He lowered the deposit requirements for single parents, offered payment plans instead of lump sums, replaced the formal application process with something Lorraine designed. A conversation. Sit down, tell me your situation. What do you need? What can you afford? Let's see what we can figure out. 3 families moved in that first year. A woman with 2 sons who'd been living with her mother in a 1-bedroom. A couple with a newborn and a 3-year-old who'd been on a wait list for Section 8 housing for 14 months. A grandmother raising her twin grandchildren after her daughter's accident. Gerald knew each of them by name. He fixed their faucets, replaced their smoke detectors, showed up on the 1st of every month not to collect rent but to check if anything needed repairing. He never told any of them about Denise, about the park bench, about the night his wife brought a stranger's children into his house and cracked his life wide open, but they knew anyway, because Lorraine told them. Not as a story, as a promise. This is a place where families are welcome. That's all you need to know. On Saturday mornings, Gerald took Jalen fishing. They drove to a lake 30 minutes outside the city. Gerald's old rods and reels, the ones that had lived in the storage room for 15 years, filling space where a crib was supposed to be, now rode in the back of his truck, next to a tackle box and 2 folding chairs. They didn't talk much while they fished. Gerald wasn't a talker. Jalen wasn't either. They sat in comfortable silence watching their lines drift in the water waiting for something to pull. Once Jalen caught a bass. Small, maybe a pound. He held it up and looked at Gerald with an expression Gerald recognized immediately. It was the same look Miles had given Lorraine when he handed her the dandelion. Not "look what I did, look who I'm with." Gerald helped him unhook it. They threw it back, watched it disappear into the dark water. "Good catch," Gerald said. "Yes, sir," Jalen said. They kept fishing. Lorraine visited every Sunday. She brought food. Baked chicken, collard greens, cornbread. Enough for the whole family, and then some. Nyla ran to her every time the door opened, arms up, screaming the only name she'd ever given Lorraine. Lolo. 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 And Lorraine? This woman who had lost 3 children before they drew breath, who had carried that grief like a stone in her chest for 15 years, who had filled her house with silence and her husband with walls. This woman knelt down and gathered a 2-year-old into her arms and held her. The way she'd always wanted to hold someone small and warm and hers. Not hers by blood, not hers by law, hers by choice, hers by love. Hers by the only thing that ever really makes a family, showing up. They refused to rent to her because she had 4 kids. 4 children. That was the reason. The liability, the noise, the wear and tear, the risk. 4 small bodies that took up too much space and cost too much to accommodate and came with too many needs that no landlord wanted to manage. Every single door in the city closed on Denise Calloway because of those 4 children. But those 4 children were also the reason a retired nurse stopped her car in the dark and walked toward a park bench instead of driving past. They were the reason a man who hadn't cried in 12 years sat at his kitchen table at midnight and wept. They were the reason a room full of fishing rods became a bedroom painted lavender. They were the reason a marriage that had gone quiet found its voice again. 4 children didn't destroy anything. They rebuilt everything. Denise didn't need a billionaire. She didn't need a miracle. She didn't need a social media campaign, or a viral moment, or a lottery ticket, or divine intervention. She needed one door to stay open long enough for her to walk through it. And Lorraine needed a reason to open it. Gerald built walls his whole life. Around his properties, around his heart, around those empty rooms that echoed with the absence of children he'd never hold. He built them carefully, meticulously, the way he maintained his buildings. Solid, secure, impenetrable. It took 4 children and a mother with nowhere to go to show him that walls only protect you from the things you need most.